Good morning. My name is Charlie Baum. We're in the middle of topic number 3 on efficiency. Today I'd like to look at the effect of price ceilings and price floors on efficiency. A price ceiling is going to be the maximum amount that can be charged for a good or service. A price ceiling is a legally maximum price. It's kind of like a ceiling in a room. You can't physically move above the ceiling, and a price ceiling is the same way. The price in a market can't legally rise above the price ceiling. A price floor is a legal minimum on what can be charged. It's like a floor in a room. The price can't legally fall below the price floor in the same way we can't physically fall through the floor in a room. Price controls are rare in the United States, but there are some good examples. One is a minimum wage. This is a minimum amount, a legally minimum amount that must be paid to workers. It would be illegal to pay workers an amount that's lower than the minimum. Rent controls represent a price ceiling. It's a maximum amount that can be paid on apartments for rent. There are also many agricultural price controls. An agricultural price control is typically a legal minimum. It's a price floor designed to help farmers by increasing agricultural prices. So let's look at an agricultural price floor first. We might call this an agricultural price support. Let's suppose that in this market we are examining bushels of wheat. And if the market is in an equilibrium, then the price will be $3 per bushel of wheat. That's where the market supply and market demand curves intersect each other. Consumer surplus will be the area under the demand curve and above the price level. That's the benefit of this market transaction to consumers. And producer surplus will be equal to the area above the supply curve and below the price level. Now let's consider a price floor. This is a price support designed to help farmers. In this example, we're going to suppose that the price floor is $3.50, and what this means is the price can't legally fall below that floor. When the price goes up, the amount of wheat demanded by consumers goes down, and the quantity of wheat supplied by farmers goes up. Farmers are willing to supply more wheat at the higher price, and consumers are not willing to buy as much wheat at the higher price. Okay, let's look at the change in consumer surplus and producer surplus in this example. Consumer surplus before the price floor had been the area under the demand curve and above the price. The price was originally $3. With the price floor, consumer surplus is still the area under the demand curve, but it's the area above the higher price level, and the higher price level is $3.50. So consumer surplus has shrunk, and producer surplus has changed as well. Before the price floor, producers had the area under the price level and above the supply curve. With the price floor, the area under the price level, which is $3.50, and the area above the supply curve is this trapezoid. Producer surplus is only obtained for units that producers actually sell to consumers, and at a price of $3.50, consumers only demand 1.8 billion bushels per year. So producers only get surplus for the area that's under the price level and above the supply curve for units that are actually sold to consumers. So if you take this together, then area A used to be consumer surplus, and it gets transferred to producers. It was part of consumer surplus, and it moves to producer surplus. But areas B and C used to be economic surplus, and those areas are lost. Area B used to be consumer surplus, and area C used to be producer surplus, and those those areas are no longer economic surplus. We call areas B and C deadweight loss. It is economic surplus that's lost because of the price floor. Let's look at another price control. In this example, we're going to look at a minimum wage, which is a legal minimum. Employers can't pay workers less than the minimum. The demand curve, the blue demand curve in this diagram, represents employers because employers demand workers. The red supply curve represents the workers. They are the ones that supply their labor. At a wage rate of W1, the equilibrium quantity is L1. But if the minimum wage is set higher than the equilibrium wage, then more workers are willing to work because they're paid a higher wage, but employers do not demand as many of those workers because the workers are more expensive. The result is a shortage. The result is a surplus of workers. The quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, and the result is that there are extra workers. We call these workers, the surplus, unemployed workers. This diagram illustrates that the minimum wage helps some workers. It helps the L2 number of workers who have jobs and are paid higher wages, but it hurts other workers. It hurts those workers who would like to have a job and who would be willing to work at a wage rate of W1, but who are unable to get a job because employers are not willing to hire that many workers at the higher minimum wage. So some workers are hurt by the minimum wage and some workers are helped by the minimum wage. Let's look at another example of a price control. In this example, we're looking at rent controls. The equilibrium rent is initially $1,500 per month. That's the rent on an apartment. The quantity of apartments rented is 2 million. Let's impose a price ceiling this time, which is a legal maximum price of $1,000. At this legal maximum, producers who are the ones supplying the apartments are not willing to supply as many because they're not getting as much in rent. But you'll notice that the consumers demand more apartments, and of course this is because the price of the apartments is less. And so when the price goes down, consumers demand more apartments. When the rent goes down, consumers demand more of them. This results in a shortage of apartments, and the shortage is a difference between the quantity demanded, which is 2.1 million, and the quantity supplied, which is 1.9 million. We can also examine the effects of the rent control on economic surplus. Before the rent control, the equilibrium rent was $1,500, and consumers had surplus that was equal to the area under the demand curve and above the price level. And producers had surplus that was equal to the area above the supply curve and under the price level. So I've outlined consumer surplus and producer surplus before the rent control. With the rent control, the quantity supplied is only 1.9 million, and so producer surplus is the area under the new price level, which is the price control. It's $1,000 and above the supply curve. Consumer surplus is the area under the demand curve and above the price level, but only for units that are actually supplied that actually get to be consumed. So I've highlighted consumer surplus. This shows that area A is a transfer. It's a transfer from producers to consumers. Area A used to be producer surplus before the rent control, but it becomes consumer surplus after the rent control. And this leaves deadweight loss of areas B and C. Areas B and C used to be economic surplus, but they're lost. Area B used to be consumer surplus, and Area C used to be producer surplus, but with the price control, with the price ceiling, that area is lost and becomes deadweight loss. So in conclusion, we see that with government price controls, some individuals and players in a market are made better off, and some individuals in a market in the market are made worse off. But on the whole, when you combine the people who are made better off and the people who are made worse off, price controls that move markets away from their equilibrium prices create deadweight loss and make markets as a whole worse off. This is because price controls eliminate mutually beneficial voluntary transactions.